didn't know what that was, that the girls or ladies were doing. Most of us do that every morning on our own. It'll take about 20 minutes to do it every morning after we pray. So that's a practice you can add if you want to your whatever you're doing in your world of practices. And then we're going to be talking a little bit about a couple different pieces. We're going to be learning about some of the deeper walking, how you walk towards God. We're going to be looking at some of the end-of-life issues. How many of you are therapists in here, or some type of therapist? Okay. Did any of you deal with end-of-life issues? So you're working with, sort of, you are?
I work with grief.
With
I
grief?
work with grief, yeah.
One of the programs we're going to be doing, we're actually going to be kicking off this year. I'm calling it End-of-Life Spiritual Transition. And my experience as a doctor is that it kind of breaks my heart because I've been around so many people that have died, and the death process is just really not a nice process of death. You know, when the people are dying, there's no real understanding of what to do with them. So what ends up happening is essentially, you know, people are crying and screaming and yelling, and, you know, and mostly disturbing the dead person or the person dying because they're, you know, trying to die, and instead they have to deal with taking care of everybody around them, you know, that's in their grieving process. So one of the things when my mother was dying, about, I don't know, 10 years ago, she was in her death process, and she had a brain tumor and a metastatic lung that went to the brain, and she was having trouble breathing. So actually the dying wasn't from the tumor, but it was actually from the breath. And her blood oxygen levels dropped. They're normally supposed to be about 100, and hers dropped down to about 60. So she was at that, you know, kind of hovering in the moment of death. And her brother, her older brother, who was my cousin or my uncle, you know, he came to me and he said, Ibrahim, he said, you're a spiritual teacher. Can't your God save her? And I said, I'm sure he could if he wanted to. And he said, well, if your God can save her, I'll believe in God. So I said, okay. So I prayed. I said, Allah, this Josh, his name was Josh, wants to see a miracle so that he can believe in you. Do you want to give a miracle or not today? Are you in the miracle mood? So the answer I heard was, cross her through the qualities. Cross her through the qualities. So in Sufism we have the 99 names of God, and crossing through the qualities means that you have to return the qualities back to God. Everybody has the qualities in them, you have to bring it back to God. So I sat down, and for 4 hours I began crossing her through each of the 99 names, returning the names back to God, and returning her names back to God. And I had no desire other than to help her, you know, return, and whatever happened, happened. Well, at the end of 4 hours, out of nowhere, because she was in coma, she sits up in her bed. I wasn't even done with the 99, I was down to about, I would say maybe 89. And she sits up in bed, and she grabs her oxygen. She asks why her oxygen fell off. She puts her oxygen back on, asks for a hot dog. No. I'm serious. And wants to know where the food is, and ends up living for a bunch of more years. and her brother actually, because of that, turned back to God. And until today, he's actually very much, you know, seeking to know God in his way. So it was a really great story. But what I really saw from it was that that the end-of-life process was more malleable than I thought. You know, like there was more chance for shifting what could happen there. So I started looking at this with different patients, and I don't remember all of them, but some of them that stand out was actually the second one that really stood out to me was my own father when he started dying 3 years later. And the same thing happened where I thought, I want him to have a good ending. And there's ways of really telling when people have good endings. And when the spirit leaves the body and goes into light, the person has a good ending. But when the spirit leaves the body and goes into darkness, they have a bad ending. So if you learn to see the spirits, you can actually determine to a certain level what happens after death. Ultimately only God really knows, but by watching the spirits, if you learn to see them, because you can actually see the spirits, they're like balls of light. And if you watch the spirits, you can basically tell kind of where they go. So I had been watching many spirits at that point, and unfortunately, most of them did not actually go that far. They did not have fabulous endings. Most of them actually had kind of not so good endings. They kind of went into like a gray zone, and the light wasn't very, very good. And I was really started getting concerned about the endings of people, that people's endings were not actually very good from a spiritual point of view. So I started looking at how do you actually have a better ending for a person? How can you give a person a better ending? Is there a logarithm? I was actually looking for a logarithm. Like, how do you do it? And I started studying, the Sufi teachings, Islamic teachings, Christian teachings, Jewish teachings, Buddhist teachings. I was looking into all these different systems, looking at end-of-life issues. And one of the things I discovered, which was very interesting, was that intercession at the last part of their life, like after the terminal diagnosis had come in, that there was a special door that was there, and that, in other words, the door for very deep spiritual growth was possible at that time for some reason. The way I interpreted it was God was giving them their last chance. So what I found was that I needed to really focus on that. If I really took that last moment of life and really focused on their spiritual growth, that something amazing could happen for people. It was like they could quantum leap in a way that seemed to not be available at any other time in their life. So I started focusing all my energy on that last moment of life for the people who were dying to see if we could, sort of lift their spirits up so they would go into light when they died. And I kept remembering that voice that said, return the qualities, work on the qualities. So when my father died, I was dying. I went out to Chicago where he was dying, and I sat with him at the bedside for a week, and I worked for about 8 to 10 hours a day, every day, on all the 99 names. So it wasn't like with my mother where it was a 4-hour process. This was more like a 40 or 50 or 60-hour process. It was a very long process of just working at returning his qualities back to God. And about the day before he died, I remember that there was like a celebration in the world of spirit. Like I felt the spirit celebrating. And when I looked, there was like he had completed some moment in his own spiritual growth, and I knew that there was some level of success here that had happened because it was a celebration. And he died, I don't know, the next day, I think, or 2 days later. It was shortly after that he died. But when his spirit left, it was like the spirit literally jumped. Like where most spirits, when they leave the body, they slowly phase out of the body and they go into the subtle worlds. And there's all sorts of things that happen in those subtle worlds as they're leaving. but my father literally just jumped over it. He just jumped over it and was like on the other side of it. And it was incredible. And I was like, wow, you can, there's so much possibility in the last little bit of life. And we're missing it all the time because all we're doing is grieving the loss when we actually should be working to help the people really cross in, a really good way. Well, I started working on that. That has become the end-of-life teachings that we're going to be doing. And the final piece actually came, which there was a hadith. Hadith are sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, where he said that, it was interesting, he said that if a person takes shahada, which means that they accept, they say, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, meaning there's no God but a God and Muhammad was a prophet, which means they accept that way, that God like resets the wheel, meaning that they start from zero. So whatever's come in their life, they reset the wheel. And I heard about that, and I true or not, because I'm a person who's got to taste it. You can tell me anything, I don't believe you. But if I taste it myself, I know. You can say this is honey, but I've got to taste it, know it's honey before I trust that it really is. So this man, one of our beloveds, his name was Suleiman. His mom was dying, and she was like 83 years old. And right at the end of her life, literally a week before she dies, she takes shahada. So she does the shahada and says La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah and steps into the new way. And as she did that in her spirit, her entire spirit was in flux with pure white light. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. She dies a week later. It was almost like a tabula rasa. It was like her spirit was so pure and so like a child, like a newborn. And when she died, it was like it was clearly one of the holiest deaths I've seen. In other words, there was so much light and so much beauty and so much wonderment that I really did understand that there was truth to what the prophet had said. That they really do have tabula rasa, that they really do have the ending, and that ending really happened. So all this has kind of been put together into a teaching which we're going to be calling End of Life, Spiritual Transition. And it's going to be about helping counsel the people who have dying relatives or whoever, friends, to help them to deal with the end-of-life issues, isn't it? And to help them to, and help the person to cross over in that very deep way. So I want to go over briefly. I was going to teach you a little bit about it this morning, and if any of you are counselors and you want to add this to your repertoire of things that you do, I think myself that it's one of the most amazing, of all the things that I do, I think it's probably one of the things I love the most. I think there's something about the death process that is so holy and so incredible that, because let's face it, we're on a spiritual path, right? Which is, and a spiritual path really means returning your spirit back to God. So here, at the time of death, that's exactly what's happening. It's the moment when the spirit is going back to God. So you're spiritually right in it the whole time, So I'm going to explain to you how it works, and to let you know that this is a program that we're going to be doing, and if any of you would like to learn it, please consider it, and happy Mother's Day. How many mothers do we have in here? Oh my God, congratulations, moms. Very good. All right.